Elite Facts presents
What if the world went vegetarian? So we realize we've been on a bit of a what-if kick recently with regard to the world's existence and how we'd survive without certain things. So far, we've covered a world without the sun, the moon, oil, the internet, and humans. Well, we've decided to switch it up a bit. Today, we won't be talking about taking something away from the world, unless you count one person's will to live if they love buckets of KFC and a belly full of Arby's roast beef, and instead we're going to talk about a worldwide lifestyle change. In this video, we're going to discuss what would happen if everyone in the world was to go vegetarian.
7.
Billions of animals would avoid a lifetime of suffering. Let's begin with the most obvious positive thing to come out of this scenario. Since there would be no need for meat as a food source anymore, many farm animals, and well, all animals in general, would live longer and happier lives. The reason we say happier is because on many industrial farms, animals are kept in cramped conditions and are never given the opportunity to raise families, forage for food, or do anything else that's natural and important to them. Most of these animals don't ever get to feel the warmth of the sun on their backs or breathe fresh air. They live with the constant feeling of impending doom until they're loaded onto lorries and headed for the nearest supermarket. Well, all that misery would end for them if the world went vegetarian. We know it sounds like we're being judgmental towards all you beef eaters out there, and this is pretty depressing to think about, but there's no harm in looking at things from a different perspective, right?
6.
Energy intensive. Next up, with meat no longer being used as a source for food, it would have a positive effect when it comes to energy. One of the most frequently mentioned environmental costs of eating meat is the CO2 involved in producing it. It ain't cheap. Compared to fruits and vegetables, the amount of CO2 released by the production of meat is ridiculously costly. Studies have shown that producing half a pound of potatoes, for example, emits the same amount of CO2 as driving a small car 0.17 miles. At the other end of the spectrum, half a pound of beef emits as much CO2 as driving that same car 9.8 miles, or 12.7 kilometers. Yeah, we're not even kidding. A global switch to diets that rely less on meat and more on fruits and vegetables would reduce greenhouse gas emissions by 2/3, according to research from the Oxford Martin School at Oxford University that estimated both the health and climate change impacts of moving towards more plant-based diets in all the major regions of the world.
5.
What about the people? At this point, you're probably thinking, well, hang on there, Tex, that all sounds great, but where's the bad news? I mean, a world without Big Macs sounds terrible, but what directly affects me in this situation? Well, Ben Fallon, a researcher at the University of Cambridge, says, quote, there are over 3.5 billion domestic ruminants on Earth and tens of billions of chickens produced and killed each year for food. We'd be talking about a huge amount of economic disruption. While retraining and government subsidies would help many former livestock-related employees, significant unemployment and social upheaval would be inevitable, especially in rural communities. Not to mention that parts of the world which currently support livestock would have to switch to support crops instead. Fallon also says that, quote, without livestock, life in certain environments would likely become impossible for some people. That especially includes nomadic groups such as the Mongols and Berbers who, stripped of their livestock, would have to settle permanently in cities or towns, likely losing their cultural identity in the process. It's likely that the world's poor would stand to lose the most from no longer having nutrient-dense meat in their diet. It's been said that animal products contain more nutrients per calorie than that of plants like grains and rice. So essentially, this would cause a worldwide health crisis, all thanks to the lack of micronutrients. There would also be a huge impact on almost all cultures worldwide that center their important traditions around the consumption of meat.
4.
Healthier planet, healthier population. So the health situation is a bit of a weird one because you've got two sides of the spectrum here. Researchers looked into the environmental and healthcare benefits that would be felt by the year 2050 in 3 scenarios. The first scenario looked at the world's population following global guidelines on healthy eating, HGD. The second looked at the world becoming vegetarian, VGT. And the third looked at a world gone vegan, VGN. researchers found significant environmental benefits in the form of lower CO2 emissions, as well as significant healthcare benefits in terms of lower premature deaths and lower healthcare costs. The large variables indicated on this chart stem from the unknown cost of carbon emissions and healthcare in 2050. Dr. Marco Springman of the Oxford Martin Program on the Future of Food, who conducted the study for this experiment, stated that, quote, "What we eat greatly influences our personal health and the global environment."
3,
The world's hungry would no longer be hungry. Your chicken, beef, and pork may all be grown locally, but have you ever thought about where your animal's feed comes from? Vegetarians and vegans aren't stuffing their faces with grains and soybeans. No, it's the cattle that are doing that. A staggering 97% of the world's soy crop is fed to livestock. It would take 40 million tons of food to eliminate the most extreme cases of world hunger, yet nearly 20 times that amount of grain is fed to farmed animals every year in order to produce meat. So let's put this into perspective. We live in a world where an estimated 850 million people are living their lives hungry and dying of starvation. Why are we feeding cattle who have fields to feed off of instead of sending grains and soybeans to those who really need it? It is criminally wasteful to feed perfectly edible food to animals on farms in order to produce a burger rather than feeding it directly to people, especially when you consider that it takes roughly 6 pounds of grain to produce 1 pound of pork. Just let that sink in.
2,
There would be more land available for our growing population. Now, we're not saying kick those damn freeloading animals off the farms. But the fact of the matter is, countries across the world are bulldozing huge swaths of land in order to make room for more factory farms to house all the additional farm animals, such as chickens, cows, and pigs, not to mention the large crop fields needed to feed them. But when you eat plant foods directly, instead of indirectly eating bushels and bushels of grain and soya that have been funneled through animals first, you need a lot less land. A charity by the name of VegFam funds sustainable plant food projects. This group says that a 10-acre plot can support 60 people by growing soybeans, 24 people by growing wheat, or 10 people by growing maize, but only 2 by raising cattle. What's more, Dutch scientists predict that 2.7 billion hectares of land currently used for cattle grazing would be freed up by global vegetarianism, along with 100 million hectares of land currently used to grow crops for livestock. With the population of the UK expected to exceed 70 million by the year 2030, those blokes will need all the land they can get to accommodate the extra demand for living space and food.
1,
Hospitals worldwide would be under less strain. Obesity is a major problem around the world. The British Health Service, NHS, has warned that if left unchecked, the country's obesity rates will bankrupt the health service. Meat, dairy foods, and eggs, all of which contain cholesterol and saturated fat, are the main culprits in obesity, which contributes to the UK's top killers: heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, and various types of cancer. It might come as a surprise considering their healthy diet, but there are overweight vegetarians and vegans, just as there are skinny meat eaters. But vegans are about 1/10 as likely to be obese as meat lovers. This happens once you replace high-fat animal-derived foods with healthy fruits, veggies, and grains. It becomes much more difficult to pack on the pounds. What's more, many health problems can be alleviated and even reversed by switching to a plant-based diet. Going vegan might not make the world a perfect place. Again, a world without a KFC bucket or an Arby's roast beef sandwich isn't a pleasant thought, but it would certainly make the world a much healthier place. Now, excuse me while I go grab some lunch at Subway. What other topics would you like us to talk about? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe and tap the bell button for notifications of our latest videos. Thanks for watching.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.